All right, everybody, we'll call this meeting to order, please. It's 3 o'clock. It's May 22nd. This is Committee of the Whole meeting. I will ask for any declarations of conflict from councillors for today's meeting. Seeing none, we have an agenda in front of us. I will look for adoption. And seconded, all in favor? So carried. We have no appointments or delegations and no new business. So moving on to item number 5 and our business items, 5.1, the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program for information. And I look to Director Corbett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The report in front of you is a requirement that we have every year to report in on greenhouse gas emissions and various things that the community has done related to the Climate Action Program. We are required to do this because we are a signatory to the BC Climate Action Charter. So what is in front of you is the listing of all the initiatives throughout the District of Sechelt. It covers both what was happening in 2018 and some proposed actions in 2019. The information in front of you is then sent to the province, and that determines our refund on the carbon tax. Be happy to answer any questions. That concludes my report.
I look to Council for any questions. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I know one of the possible areas in here is measuring our greenhouse gas reductions. I always like to quantify things, so I'm wondering, is that feasible at the District of Sechelt at this time?
Through the chair, I think it's certainly something to be looked into. There was development of the carbon neutral plan in 2010, 2011 that looked into the feasibility of that. I think it had a lot to do with the resourcing. They've changed it a lot since then in terms of the feasibility of doing so. It's a lot less complicated than it used to be, but certainly something you could look into as feasibility and report back on that, what it would actually take.
Any other questions? All right. Then we will move on to Oh, you'd be correct. So, stepping back, can I have a motion? Well, I can make a motion that the report be received. Seconded by Councillor McLean. All in favor? And okay, thank you, Corporate Officer. All right, 5.2, Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw with regards to Wade, report from Ian Hall. Or I need to make a motion to receive the report. All in favor? Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so we have back again the Wade rezoning for 3 properties on the corner of Wharf Avenue and East Porpoise Bay. Since you last saw the application at a previous Committee of the Whole meeting in March, the Advisory Planning Commission has had a chance to review and comment on their current proposal, which was the 5-story building with 40 units of residential and 3,000 square feet of commercial space. I'll get into some of the APC comments later, and you'll see them summarized in my report. But what I wanted to do primarily in this presentation was really kind of outline sort of taking a step back, but for council, they kind of need to grapple with the primary decision of basically 2 options. There's option 1 is directing the applicant to conform with the OCP and the implications of that, or option 2, considering deviating from the OCP in terms of particularly around height and density. So right now we have these three properties, they're all zoned R2 under the zoning bylaw, but in the community plan, there's the downtown center designation, which is in red, and then the multifamily mixed residential, which is in orange. The downtown center designation and sort of associated policies are kind of one of the main issues, that there's a key element in here where it refers to a maximum height of 3 stories or 12 meters. So the OCP designation and the policies basically put some parameters around development within this land use designation. So when we get into the choice of what we're looking at is, conforming to the OCP, and that sets the stage for the rezoning application and sets out the box within which they would develop, versus considering an OCP amendment to say, okay, we want to go beyond what the OCP designates for this area. We want to support higher density, greater height, etc. Just for some context, directly adjacent to this property to the south was the relatively new Wharf Place building. That's 3 stories, ground level commercial with 2 stories of residential above. And that's kind of, again, conforming with the OCP policies of the 3 stories, 12 meters in height. So really what I want to get council to consider is those 2 options. Before we get too much into further design or redesign of the building, APC had some great comments on the 5-story proposal. There's a lot that one could do to implement their comments and redesign the 5-story building to make it much more palatable. But stepping back from that, I think the decision needs to be really made up front. Do we want this application, do we want to support the development to conform to the OCP, which limits it to the 3 stories, and have the applicant work within that? Or is the council willing to consider deviating from that, supporting increased density over and above what the established OCP policies are, and going in that direction, which would then sort of feed back into their 5-story proposal? I think, from my discussions with the applicant, they're open to trying to make anything work on this site. I think they have originally had different ideas about what they wanted to do on this site. I think a number of years ago, District of Sechelt staff may have directed them to a much higher density beyond what the OCP actually supported, which doesn't kind of has led them to where they are now. But that may have been a misdirection on our part to kind of support something at a much higher density than the OCP actually indicated. So we're back to these 2 options of where do we want to go, what do we want to see on this site. Again, the OCP does contemplate higher density than what the existing zoning allows for now. There's just residential zoning on the site. The OCP would support quite a substantial increase in density, based on this 3 stories. Again, you're sort of setting the stage for something similar to the Wharf Place building could go right down onto these 3 properties and fit within the existing neighborhood and with what the OCP is intending to go. And that would, again, set the stage for what could happen around it. On the western side of Wharf Avenue across the way is also ripe for redevelopment. So you could see something of a similar scale all around within that downtown center area. And that could be, again, something that is relatively straightforward, has a lot fewer infrastructure or other rezoning requirements. Again, based on sort of what the applicant is currently proposing, it would be a decrease in terms of residential units, because there'd be fewer floor area, but also potentially greater commercial floor area on the ground floor, because right now they're proposing 3,000 square feet on 2 levels, but that's not covering their whole building footprint. Another thing to keep in mind, certainly from the previous public hearing and a lot of the comments we've had in the past, that the community feels quite strongly about the existing OCP designations and what that entails for the form and character of development and the amount of density. At the same time, there is the option for them to apply to amend the OCP and for council to consider if we want to see greater density in this area, if we think that supports something more beneficial than what the existing parameters are. Again, the challenge with this site is we still have the limitations around the goods movement route along Wharf Avenue to East Porpoise Bay. That's going to remain as the only goods movement route for the foreseeable future at the moment. There's no alternative sites that have been determined or that are available, so that's something that for the next little while anyway is going to be provide something that's going to have to be balanced against whatever we might want this corner to become either on all sides. In terms of it, there's an opportunity for it to have increased density, have more of a pedestrian focus, but that comes at the cost of restricting traffic flow when it comes to heavier truck traffic and moving goods. So again, what could be proposed under the OCP would fit more within balancing goods movement versus pedestrian safety and movement. If we're going beyond the OCP, we're wanting to see more density, then we're getting into a much greater conflict between those two issues. And sort of at the moment, in the absence of any alternatives, that could have a negative effect on sort of the industrial areas further up the road that we're also wanting to support. So again, it's coming down to without getting too much into the design of the buildings, really this fundamental choice between following the OCP policies as they're established and as the parameters that they lay out in terms of the density considered for this area, allowing a similar development that's already in place, increasing the density over the existing zoning, having a reasonable balance between increasing pedestrian movement and safety around this intersection while still facilitating the goods movement routing, and then supporting similar and complementary redevelopment around that intersection where, again, sort of, as I mentioned, across the way, across Wharf Avenue, that corner too could be ripe for redevelopment of a similar nature, and you could have a fair amount of density cropping up there that, again, isn't necessarily conflicting with ensuring that the goods movement route is maintained and protected. The more we kind of deviate from the OCP, the more density we add there. You're certainly gaining a lot. I mean, you're obviously gaining the potential for more affordable housing. The more units that they're proposing, the more we can require as part of our rezoning as affordable housing that would be protected in a housing agreement that could actually be set at below market rates. So obviously the smaller scale application, you would get less of that, and you would have the potential for fewer community amenity contributions. But again, we're at that sort of balance of the OCP designation allows us to get a lot of things and allows some significant redevelopment on that corner. To go beyond that are what we potentially gain worth the increased density in terms of that loss of the goods movement route or potentially just negatively affecting traffic flow versus simply getting more units. So that's something that council is going to have to really grapple with in terms of what they want to see here. And again, noting that going beyond the OCP also sets the stage for redevelopment around it too, so that if this corner gets redeveloped in a manner that goes beyond what the OCP says now, then somebody else is going to come in looking at another corner and say, hey, well, I too want to go beyond the OCP. So now you're going to have even more potential density in area that had been established as saying, we want to see redevelopment here, but we want it limited to this scale and this scope. I can get more into some of the APC comments, but I just wanted to really focus on the primary question now for council is, a choice of these two options. Do you want to go one way or do you want to go the other? And then we can direct the applicant to say, here's the box within which you have to work with, conform to the OCP, and that means, 3 stories, 12 meters, make something work there, and I think you could probably make a lot of things work there. Or no, we're going to be willing to consider going beyond the OCP, and we're willing to consider the increased density, whether it's 5 stories or whatever it is, and the positives and negatives that come from that, knowing that simply increasing the density, you're bringing in the potential for a lot more conflict, even though we might be gaining some additional amenities there. Just quickly, just because the APC did have some great comments on the building, just architecturally, that could still apply to a smaller scale building. One of the things they talked about was, the 5-story building as proposed was a very regular shaped building on an irregular shaped lot, and you could do a lot to really make the building more irregular. That would actually fit better on the lot. The roof overhang, the way it is now, is a flat extending out over the building, makes it appear much more imposing than it needs to be, and that you could do a number of things to soften that. You could have more articulation, less glass in the material. You could make it feel more like a village-style building as opposed to a very urban design. So the APC had made some recommendations regarding the application that council give pedestrianization should be given priority for that corner in terms of development on that site, and that prior to further consideration by council, that the applicant should explore options for reducing the height and massing of the building by improving the building articulation, changing the roof line to reduce the size of the overhang, and stepping back the top floor of the building. This is an example that an APC member had forwarded from a building in Bend, Oregon. This is a 5-story building. The first 2 stories here, and then the top 3 stories are stepped back. So obviously this is something that it wouldn't have to look exactly like this, but this kind of demonstrates a number of the things that the APC was talking about in terms of changing the roof line. So you have a lot more open space on the roof. It's not just a single solid overhang. You've got different projections coming out all around the building. Even the 2 stories at the front, there's a lot of articulation there. So the person had also been here at this building in person and indicated that, it doesn't feel like a 5-story building when you're standing there. So there's a lot of design things you could do to make the 5-story building not feel as imposing as it could be. This is another example in West Vancouver. This was done by the same architects who were working on the Green Court building. This was another seniors facility, also 5 stories, but again, they've done some issues to kind of break up the roof line. It's not just one big imposing thing. So there's a lot of things you could do architecturally to alter the current proposed building from what it is now in terms of how it would feel to the pedestrians on the ground all around the building, because it's, again, quite a regular shaped building, as the APC was indicating, where it's kind of sitting on an irregular lot. But the real issue, before we get too much into what the building could look like, really comes back to these 2 options. And so that's basically the end of my presentation. This is sort of the main question that council has to grapple with is option 1, conforming to the OCP, or option 2, allowing some deviation from the OCP in terms of increased density.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Questions or comments from council? Anybody waving their hand? Councillor Scott?
My feeling is that I lean towards option 2, based on the fact that the building next door it looks great at 3 stories, but it was also built in times when land values were significantly less than what they are now. So if we're looking to invite developers to start revitalizing our downtown core, we need to give them some incentive to see a return on their investment and not have to build to levels that are going to create $1 million condos. We need to be able to allow them to build something that's got some more density to it, that they can bring the cost down and people can afford to live in them. So I like the idea of the step back. I think it adds to it. I think going up to 5 stories isn't a huge issue. I think it's something that we need to look at in our OCP anyway. So that's my opinion.
Councillor Kuster.
I too think we should look at our OCP. I think we need more units. We need some affordable units. We need to secure them for our community. And I like the step back the APC talked about as well. So I think that's the way we should go. I know we're talking about the downtown quite a bit. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get going on the downtown, so I think this is a great way to start getting some units for our community right away, or moving forward. And I really think we need to secure those affordable housings. Thanks.
Councillor McLean?
Yeah, I'm in favor of an OCP amendment for this to bring it above the 3 stories. I still think 5 stories is pushing it. In my mind, 4 stories is the right height for this location. I recognize that the recommendations by APC do help towards that. Not quite good enough in my mind, but definitely a step in the right direction. There's no doubt about that. I think more articulation on this building will make quite a large difference, and just make it more architecturally interesting and vary that roof line so it's not quite as imposing. So it looks like we're heading towards something around the 5-story version of this building. And if we go down that route, I want to make sure that we are getting strong community amenities for this. And I recognize that we've been talking about affordable housing, but recently contributions to the downtown revitalization and childcare funds have been added. I'd like to ask staff how the downtown and the childcare funds are going to be managed, because I don't think we have a process for those 2 yet. Yeah, unless I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, definitely those are new in the sense that I don't think we've taken amenity contributions specifically for those items, but they're certainly supported by the OCP policies around amenity contributions. And what we're looking at there is sort of establishing funds, if they're not already established, to start building the basically cash amounts through amenity contributions, so that we can support either, in the case of childcare, either creating those units ourselves or helping fund the development of those units, or fund studies in terms of additional feasibility or whatever it is. I mean, I think the intent is to start building that fund to support childcare, whether it's assessments or development focused. And then again, similar to the sort of downtown revitalization, having a fund to start working from in terms of whether it's dedicated to land acquisition or infrastructure improvements, or other things that would support revitalization of the downtown, and start building those funds that the district can then apply to those specific areas. And that, again, recognizing that for all development, especially those that are outside the downtown, contributing money to support redevelopment in the downtown, recognizing that they're trying to, usually through the rezoning process, acquire additional density and benefits, that we could be having downtown, but they're wanting to develop properties outside the downtown. And something like the childcare is this sort of a universal need that's required all over the coast, similar to the affordable housing. But again, there's sort of what we can require through the rezoning application in terms of taking affordable housing units, and then if we wanted to seek additional affordable housing units, again, or cash contributions, that could be over and above what the minimum requirement would be. But I think that's sort of starting to build those funds, taking cash contributions for those, as sort of outlined in the OCP, is sort of a good start to kind of build our resources to be able to dedicate to those issues.
Eva? Councillor Lamb?
I've just, it really caught me, this thing here about cash contributions. And I mean, obviously that's something we haven't been doing yet. And so you're asking the developer for 20% low-cost housing. And you're asking them for low-cost housing. You're asking to, to put in pedestrian sidewalks. You're asking them to put everything underground. You're asking them to upgrade your community. And, who pays for that? It's not the government doesn't come in and say, okay, you know what, you're going to do this, and we're going to give you X amount of dollars back. The developer there's only so much money in the development for the developer. And so the more onus you put on this project, the higher the cost of the units are. And the people that pay are the people that are working, that are struggling to get through. So, I mean, even if it's, I just don't believe that we can afford to put any more charges on a developer as we're moving forward. And the cost gets transferred to the working guy that's trying to raise his family and be part of this community. So I just, this other cash contribution at this time in the environment, the development atmosphere that we're in, I just don't agree with it at all.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I looked at that too and I went, holy cow. Are we really just not wanting any of this development? It's a struggle. I think we need to pick. We're going to decide on affordable units, or we're going to decide on childcare contributions or revitalization contributions. But if we start layering this, you're just not going to see anything move here. The units will be so expensive. It's not going to work.
Mayor Seegers.
Thank you. Number 2A, I had to ask what that meant. I didn't know what building articulation meant. I'd never heard the term before. So I think that's where the picture came, because I asked what the APC had meant by articulation. I think some of you were at the meeting, so I had that. I didn't have that benefit. So I like it. I like what they've put forward. I'm in support of the 5 units as well, or 5 floors. And I like the way the APC has looked at this building and given us input and given the developer input. I actually was out in the community and I had somebody who attended that meeting come up to me, and they had nothing to do with us, or they had attended the meeting. That was it. They came up and they said they were really pleased with how the APC had interacted with the developer and, how the exchange went, and really were pleased with the support that they were giving to the community and to us as council. So I like the recommendations they put forward here. I do take into account what Councillor Lamb and Councillor Scott have said. I don't see that those are parts of what we are voting on today. That would be part of what the planning staff would need to work out with the developer. So, but it's good input to give to our planning staff as they move forward. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Hall.
If I could, just to follow up on that, I mean, I do definitely hear the point. Nobody would be attempting to try to discourage applications through amenity contributions. What we're looking at is, again, with cash contributions or any kind of contribution, it would scale to the application, right? So the more that they're requiring in terms of increases over the existing zoning, in terms of density, et cetera, change in uses, we're trying to capture some of that to give back to the community. And in terms of the affordable housing requirement, looking at a minimum requirement just as part of any rezoning that says, okay, you're looking for an increase in density. We need to ensure that at least a portion of that is affordable, and we do that by taking that a number of units. We're trying to establish that 20% kind of across the board as that bare minimum that we can protect in a housing agreement, that we can set the rents or the purchase price at below market rate so that we can actually ensure that it's going to be relatively much more affordable than market housing and protected in perpetuity. In terms of cash contributions, those are, again, amenities separate from an affordable housing requirement that we're looking at. contributions to, it could be community facilities or community issues, community needs, where it's not about saying, oh, well, you're going to make, $100,000 in profit, so we're going to take $95,000 from you in cash contributions. It's really scaled to the development, recognizing that, they're asking for a 100% increase in density over what a similarly sort of multifamily zone site would be for this property. So that's pretty substantial, and wanting to make sure that we're not leaving money on the table in terms of what we can get without obviously driving them out of business. I think in terms of developments moving forward in the District of Sechelt, I think a lot of things have stalled, and they haven't stalled because of us or because we're taking amenity contributions. So I don't see this as an effort from us to try to stall things or anything. It's just supporting the community and looking at what can we take, what can we negotiate that's reasonable, that kind of helps support further development and redevelopment in the community. So that's something, again, we'll bring back to council in the future to say, we've talked to the applicant about this. This is what they've proposed. Here's what we've review on that item. And again, for council to consider what they see as part of the package in terms of minimum conditions for a rezoning application, plus amenity contributions in whatever form they take.
Thank you. You answered my questions about the affordable piece. So that goes either way, whether it's a rental unit or a purchase, and it moves beyond the person who initially lives there when it's sold in perpetuity. Councillor McLean.
So I think what's important here is to consider how this development will build our community and how it supports the long-term future of what our community looks like, because this development will be here for the next 50, 100 years. So what is the difference in building our community between a 3-story building and a 5-story building? If you're just considering the building by itself, I'm going to say not a whole lot. So that's where the community amenities come in to support building our community, building those affordable housing funds, and building some of this more pedestrianization, make it a more safe and walkable community, and potentially downtown and childcare. So I think there is value to making sure development is helping our community long term, and that's where some of these things come in my mind. So I'll stop there for now.
All right, Councillor Scott.
It's all well and good until you have to try to sell a $600,000 condo. So if we can build it and do the 5 stories and sell them for under 500, and there's affordable units, but the rest of them are still more within reach for the general public, that's also a win for our community as well.
All right, Council, we have 2 recommendations before us. What say you?
I'll move recommendations 2 and 3.
So Mayor Seegers has moved recommendations 2 and 3. Councillor Scott has seconded. All in favor? And carried. Oh, Councillor McLean.
So yeah, that passes, but I recognize the comment by Mayor Seegers earlier that community amenities aren't considered here. I will be seriously looking at that as we move forward through the process, and seeing what this development can give back to the community, especially given that now we've passed motion for 5 stories. There's 2 more that I'd like to be considered. One is water reuse. So that's another major problem in our community, the water shortage. How can this building collect rainwater, reuse it on site? And then there's another opportunity in that this is only a block away from our water resource center. I recognize we don't have solid plans right now for the reuse of water, but can we make this building capable of doing that whenever we're ready to? So I'm thinking like dual plumbing systems so you can hook it up to the toilets. And whenever we're ready to switch on that, you turn the switch and this building can make use of that water for toilets and watering and any other uses that, yeah. So that's something that I'd like to see if staff could explore and see if the proponent is interested in that kind of thing. And the other one is we can have a lot more impact on our housing market if these affordable units are rentals. I think that's one of the key shortages in our system. And I don't know what kind of policy we have around making these affordable units rental versus affordable ownership. But I think we can have more benefit to our community if we have them as rental, because that's the critical shortage we're facing today. So I just hope staff and the proponent can explore those in discussions moving forward, and I look forward to seeing what comes back.
Mayor Segers?
Thank you. So if they would be rentals, that means we should have our staff work with the Sunshine Coast Housing Society, because they have the ability to take in rent in units and manage them and stuff, which we don't have the ability in-house.
Mm-hmm. So do you need something further from us with regards to what Councillor McLean has been expressing? Okay. Perfect. Moving on. Okay. 5.3, proposed sign by law. Can I have a motion to receive the report? And second, all in favor? And we'll turn this over to our Director of Planning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of committee. I've got 3 bylaws in front of you today, and the intention with this is to consider them for moving forward for consultation. So I thought before we went into open house or any surveys or that sort of thing that you kind of get first kick at the can. And provide any direction as needed at this stage. But I just wanted to show you it's not going to come back in the next 2 weeks asking for readings. So they're still quite preliminary. So I'll go through the sign bylaw. It has a little more detail on that because it's a much more complex bylaw than the good neighbor and the tree bylaw. So first of all, in terms of sign bylaws, because these can be really irritating to a lot of people, but there's a rationale, and I think it's important to understand the rationale because that provides council with an ability to put some checks and balances on it if we've pushed it too far. So why we regulate is there's certain regulations around how we place them, mainly around safety and avoiding obstructions around traffic. A key one is proliferation. So no community necessarily wants to do Vegas. Vegas works in Vegas. It doesn't necessarily work in other communities, and so you want to avoid that visual overload. So finding kind of the right amount is always a bit challenging. In the pollution, a lot of it is light pollution, glare, noise on some signs. So having regulations to deal with that, the amount of illumination, just so we're not creating impacts off the site itself. The regulations that are being proposed, some of them deal with proportionality. So the sign size related to the building, and that's been a big issue with a lot of our business community, is our current sign bylaw will have certain set sizes on it that work for downtown on Cowrie. They do not work for the mall or anywhere up Wharf Avenue, so it's really difficult. The other is prohibit, and this is where, yes, no amount of lipstick can redeem the pig. So sometimes you really just need to go no, because there's no way that you really can make the massive balloon signs look any better than massive balloon signs, and rooftop is one of them. So sometimes it's just, no amount of DP guidelines can overcome that. So those are the main ones we look at. And so when it comes back for readings, that would be the thing to give consideration to of have we managed that properly, has it overshot? Have we done enough to make sure we actually meet those kind of requirements? So what's not regulated through the bylaw? Anything related to senior levels of government, so any provincial sign, traffic signs, safety, signs already approved through development permit, so we don't need to take additional permitting out on that. That one was actually legitimate. That's Ontario Power Corp that has a regulation against no drowning. So, you know, and sometimes when you have a really obvious sign, you just don't need to do more. Prohibited signs. So these are the ones where, yeah, it doesn't pass the lipstick test. Animated. And the challenge with a lot of these is that, you know, if you only had one, maybe, it's that it opens the door, and that's where you get into the proliferation of they start competing with one another, and it's really challenging. So the signs that we prohibit, there isn't a big change being proposed here from what we had previously. It's the rotating signs, it's the roof signs that are projecting above the roof line. It's a lot of the inflatables, and then anything that emits sound, glare, that sort of thing. We have, as we do with the current bylaw, there are a number of signs that are regulated, no permit required as long as you kind of stay within the prescribed box. And a lot of this has to do with making sure there isn't a lot of proliferation or they get very competitive with one another. Realtor signs being one of them. I did run it by a few realtors just to say, am I on track with this? And they have their own regulations, and so it meets with a lot of that. Construction project signs, community notice boards, election signs, referendum signs, garage sale and home occupation. And again, subject to size restrictions on that. Anything going above that, that then kicks into a permitting process. With the election signage, I have worked in communities that don't regulate their size, and it gets into a very competitive environment, and it gets really costly as well. So sometimes that just protects your budget. So some of the ones that require permits and are the kind of things that through the engagement process and review, we'll look at how have we got the calibration for that correct. And the challenge with this is that when it's an attractive sign, any amount is fine, and when it's an unattractive, no amount of sign reg is really going to do that. So a lot of it's quality in here, and I think a lot of the previous design guidelines tried to get at that, not always as successfully as it could. So what it's looking at here is allowing one sign per business or by canopy length. The sign area essentially works out to about a 25%. There's limits on the amount of illumination on that. So it would allow a little bit bigger than what we currently have, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. Under canopy signs, these are in the existing bylaw considered either projecting or hanging. It has a very small sign area in the existing bylaw. In the proposed one, we're not adding a sign size. We're saying you just can't project outside of the canopy, and you need a decent clearance, and it's one sign per establishment. So if you have a big canopy, it wouldn't matter what the size is. It'll be proportional to the canopy. That one also, I'll come back to that. It exempts, in some cases, from the mall. Fascia signs are essentially wall signs. These are probably the most restrictive in our current bylaw, and this is the section that drives applicants nuts. There's a one-size-fits-all of 3 square meters. It works for shops along Cowrie, it does not work for the mall, and it doesn't work for places like Rona that are just a larger area. So what's being proposed is a proportional standard that would be 20% of the building face. That was a sign area we used in Airdrie, and we were very pro-development. That seemed to work, and that's what the sign companies were good with. So it seemed to meet the proportionality of that. Has restrictions on not projecting a certain amount over the roof before it kicks into being a roof sign, and it can't project more than 13 inches from the wall, and that makes sure that you're not getting these oversized signs. Freestanding. This doesn't deviate too much on it in terms of sign area. The sign height is at 4 meters, and proposed that it's not on sites that are smaller than 10,000 square feet. This is one that it gets very context specific, so it might be one that we need a number of different regulations on, depending on where it's sitting and the actual context of the site. Because if you're dealing with a large site or something like, say, the Wilson Creek Mall, what it can take is very different from if you're at something like Rona. It's just a smaller site. So this will be one that will require quite a bit of input and review. There's also provision made for the low mount freestanding. These are sometimes our monument signs. Right now, we only regulate it under the current freestanding section. So this is bringing in a slightly new definition and would allow it to be placed in residential areas, particularly multi, and gives a different sign regulation around that. A lot of these are, you see them a lot in institutional sites, but also in mixed use and in multi-unit residential. Subdivision identification or development identification. We have it's proposing just a larger height. The area is very similar on that. One of the things I think we'd like to see encouraged is to actually do really attractive monument signing rather than the kind of freestanding that happens. Makes a huge difference to the appearance of the community. Sorry, let me go back. Window signs. This is, again, it gets really context specific, and it'll be an area we'll need quite a bit of back and forth on, particularly from the downtown merchants. Right now, we have a limit that only 25% of the window can be signed up to a maximum of 5% of the building face, which can be quite restrictive. So it's proposing a larger sign area there, and again, proportional to the size. So this is, I just thought was interesting because this is for maximum coverage. The one in the middle is actually a requirement of that particular community. It's a vape store, so they're required to cover it. But I thought they had a nice graph. It actually looks pretty good, where it just gets, again, it's not so much the amount of signage, it's the look of it is when it just gets really busy, is simply when it's just cheaper looking signage. So sometimes that's a hard one to regulate properly. It makes provision for digital display. Again, this would be an area where we need to kind of look at the calibration and the size, but it allows it in institutional areas. A lot of schools will use this. And then in private sector, it's for motor vehicle sales and fuel sales. So it's not uncommon to have that in the gas station and also in the car sales. So this will affect anything on Wharf Avenue and Wilson Creek. Requirements are limiting the sign area and that they be on a dark background. There's a world of difference in terms of the impact when it's on dark versus if you've got a lighter background, which tends to project that light. So the next steps on this, as well for almost all these bylaws, is we'll refer them to the SDAB, the Chamber Community Associations, and then what we're going to do is have a have your say session for the bylaws, and we'll bring the special event permit one as well in that. So that concludes the sign bylaw one. Any questions on that before I move to the next one?
Mayor Seegers.
I just have to say you had way too much fun finding some of those signs.
Oh, there were so many that were really
Insomnia
good that I couldn't hit in
cookies.
because they were way too rude, but they were awesome. So you can definitely go down a rabbit hole on Google Images on that one. The importance of kerning and font.
Yes. All right. I like the way you're bringing this forward. You know, obviously we each have, you know, limited exposure to particular areas of the sign bylaw, you know, that would impact us or impact people that we know. So getting it out to the community and getting their input will very much help inform this. So I know you've done a lot of work on it, and I look forward to what the community brings forward.
Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. It's a huge step in the right direction. I've spoken to a lot of small businesses who just have trouble putting up a sign. I think this will remove a lot of those restrictions and allow businesses to portray themselves in an effective manner. So I'm looking forward to the open houses.
Councillor Scott.
Just, Tracy, one question on the sign illumination section. Are the dark sky folks happy with how that's laid out? Does it meet what their requirements are?
That would be a group that would need to review this. What I haven't restricted that's currently in this sign bylaw, it doesn't allow any backlighting. It doesn't necessarily illuminate beyond the sign, so it shouldn't really affect dark sky. Although I think it's really important, especially when you have larger grocery stores are probably the worst offender just because they're big, is to have the dimmables on of when you're no longer open to bring that down. But it does have provision on the backlighting, so that will be something we'll need them to look at, especially with the, because I've put in metrics around what the illumination would be. I'd want to see of what would work for them. Certainly there's a lot of limitations in the residential areas. You can't illuminate signs in there. So it would be really in our commercial interface.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor McLean.
Question to staff. In the previous bylaw, there was some restrictions around material of the signage. I don't see that here, so I just want to confirm that there is no restrictions around material.
That's correct. I didn't put it in.
All right, I will move recommendation 2, that staff be directed to conduct further consultation with the public and stakeholders prior to bringing the bylaw back to council for consideration and reading. Seconded by Mayor Seegers. All in favor? And that's carried. And we will move on to 5.4, Good Neighbor Bylaw. Can I have a motion to receive the report? And second, all in favor? And Director of Planning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The proposed Good Neighbor bylaw brings together a number of our bylaws, and the rationale for doing this actually has a lot more to do with enforcement than really adding very different policies. What we found is that we've got so many bylaws that deal with property-related elements that affect a lot of homeowners, but they're all in different ones. They've been done at different times, so sometimes the enforcement and the legislation it references is outdated. So this was an opportunity to update that, to clarify and consolidate the bylaw enforcement section. We've had some very interesting discussions with our lawyer around some unsightly premises, and so it was an area we wanted to get a little more clarity on, particularly on the orders to comply. And it also incorporates a few new nuisance-related issues that aren't in any of our other bylaws. So one thing it does do is it adds a section on the shipping containers. And so it prohibits the sea cans in the residential areas unless they're either required for construction, in which case you need an active building permit for that, or it's modified as an accessory building, and in that case, it's subject to development permit. There are a lot of areas where they've gotten, as you can see in the one below, where they've actually used shipping containers as construction material. That would be something that really would be subject to a lot of the code issues more so than anything else. It gets a little bit challenging on there, but there really are some fascinating designs of what they've done with it. Again, we wouldn't be treating that as a shipping container, it would be construction material, so it would fall into a different category. But this at least gives our enforcement officers an opportunity to deal with some that are in the residential area. It adds, it deals with a lot of the unsightly premises. The regulations don't differ very much, but the section I have on the enforcement and the penalties is just more detailed, just to be clear on what we can do and the steps it can take. This has been a huge issue in Sechelt. They took out truckloads last week with Public Works. It's very challenging, and what we're finding on the coast is trying to get rid of abandoned vehicles is really challenging here in terms of how you take them to landfill, the opportunities. It gets very expensive on our part. We have sections on the good neighbor obligations. So there's regulations around not letting your yard go to, into invasive species or really tall grass, backyard burning, or burning of those areas. It doesn't replace the backyard burning bylaw. The requirements on an owner, if you've got a vacant property, to make sure it's secured, just to prevent vandalism in it. So it has some regulations around that. It adds some regulations around panhandling. This references a number of municipalities. You cannot, under human rights, ban panhandling in a municipality, but you can control where it can happen. And a lot of the policies that come through really have a lot about protecting people from harassment. So mainly keeping it back from the ATMs is the critical one. And the liquor and cannabis stores of just not being outside the doorway. They have to be back the 10 meters. Not at traffic lights. That has not been an issue in Sechelt yet. It was huge in Victoria. And you can't follow someone. So there's regulations around that of, again, just pestering people, that at least there's opportunity to enforce that. So again, the next steps, these will, this particular bylaw will go to the RCMP, as well as the community associations. I didn't know if, in addition to that, if there were any specific groups that would be impacted to that. We'd certainly send it to all the community associations. And again, dealing with this at the Have Your Say Day. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Mayor Seegers.
The other could be property management companies, right? Because that will impact them as well.
Councillor McLean.
I want to bring up construction noise, item 7.7. Could staff confirm if construction was permitted on Sundays before? I was looking at the old bylaw and I was confused around that, because it's clearly permitted in the new bylaw, which is, I like clear.
Through the chair, it was permitted, it just had a different time frame. I believe it was 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., I believe. But it did have a shorter time frame, and that applied to the statutory holidays as well, just a later start. Thank you.
Mayor Seegers.
Thank you. Councillor Toth isn't here, but he sent comments. So he said on 4.6, it says, no person shall panhandle from an occupant of a motor vehicle which is stopped at a traffic signal, parked, standing temporarily for the purpose of loading or unloading. He said, so can they only panhandle from occupants of moving vehicles? Okay. 4.8, no person shall, no owner may allow a parcel owned by the owner to become or remain unsightly. Just the wording is, just needs some, yeah. That's because he said something like, no owner of a parcel shall allow it to become or remain unsightly, perhaps, is what he said. Okay. So
As
just
if I
need,
own
that
one,
one
but
just
I'm
needs,
renting
it's
it.
just, yeah, that's it. That was all he had. Thanks.
Councillor McLean?
Going to 4.17, sidewalk and boulevard maintenance. So the last sentence about snow clearing, this requirement does not apply to properties fronting arterial roads or Highway 101. I don't believe the District of Sechelt takes care of those. So are they being totally left out?
Through the chair, it's more of a clarification requirement that if you're fronting Highway 101, we don't do that, and so it would really be up to MOTI on it, but it doesn't put an obligation on the homeowner on there. And then on arterial roads where there's limited access, it wouldn't require that. That usually becomes a district responsibility.
Yeah, so Highway 101, I'm thinking Wharf Avenue. We got key sidewalks going down Wharf. And I would expect businesses there to clear sidewalks as they do in the rest of the district. Arterial, I don't know the list of arterial roads off the top of my head, but I think Norris Bay Road would be an example. And that's another one I'd like to see sidewalks cleared, so that whole sentence just strikes odd to me.
Mayor Segers?
If you look at that sentence, there's a semicolon at the end of it. Is there something missing, maybe? There? No? Should be a period at the end? Okay.
Any other comments? All right, well, we have before us a recommendation. In the words of Mayor Segers, what is council's wish?
I'll move recommendation 2.
And do I have a seconder? Councillor Scott, all in favor? Oh, put the brakes on.
Yeah. I made a note here. What about invasive species? I mean, I was driving up to the airport the other day just to check what was happening up there, and there's all kinds of Scotch broom in bloom all over the municipality right now. Does it address it in here? Or is that kind of the weed piece, or?
It does it less directly. It's something we went back and forth on of whether it should be, so under the noxious weeds, it falls under their listing. But an option might be if we need to be more specific, and particularly certain kinds, usually it is the thistle and Scotch broom, if we needed to put something in more specifically to invasives or a schedule that's around the invasives. So I would take direction on what your preference would be.
Okay, I think maybe just during public consultation, we should see if that's something that we want the community to give input in. I mean, I'm noticing that in areas, the Scotch broom, for example, is really getting out of control. And not here, but I know in Gibson's, I was pointed out, there's a few lots there where the covered with knotweed. So knotweed is an issue here. I've said this before, I don't know if all of you heard this, but when it was brought up at the regional district and we did the Invasive Species Council, what they indicated was that in Great Britain, if you have knotweed on your lot, you cannot get house insurance because it can go through concrete, right? It can go through, through foundations, through driveways, etc. And one of the things that's happening on the Sunshine Coast is we have two different kinds, and they're starting to cross-pollinate. So they actually can be spread from seed. So it's actually becoming more of an issue here on the Sunshine Coast as well. So it's probably something we want to highlight and see how we want to deal with that. I'm done.
All right, we have a motion on the table for recommendation 1 and 2. So all in favor, or recommendation 2, I should say. Sorry, poor Jen. Okay, moving on to 5.5, proposed tree bylaw. May I have a motion to receive the report? And second, all in favor? And back to Tracy.
Thank you. So the proposed tree management bylaw is replacing our current environmental management bylaw, which is neither environmental or managing. So this is to put a lot more oomph into the tree cutting aspect. So what it does, it better defines and regulates the protected trees. The previous bylaw limited that to trees over 60 centimeter diameter, so that alters in this. The key one for us was it applied only to sites 1 hectare over, so 2.47 acres, which limited a lot of ability to protect a lot of trees on some sites that were a little precarious in terms of slope stability. So this just gives us an ability to cover off a little bit more there. Clarifies the requirements for tree cutting plan and the permits. Clarifies the requirements for replacement trees. And it clarifies the enforcement process. That way, again, with this bylaw was a big area of just making sure that kind of was in line with our enforcement policy. So the protected trees are, what's being proposed is any tree with diameter over 30 centimeters, so that's half of the existing size. For arbutus, Pacific dogwood, or Pacific yew, it's trees over 20 centimeter. The rest are not different from what is currently in place. So if you're under a Section 219 covenant to protect an area, the trees under there are still protected. A replacement tree, any tree within 30 meters of the water course, that's not a difference. And then any of the eagle or blue heron nesting trees. It, again, clarifies the requirements, particularly for tree replacement. I think the biggest challenge we will have in kind of calibrating the tree bylaw is finding the right balance where you get toward compliance. If it's too onerous, they cut before they ask. And we've got a lot of examples of that. And then it's next to impossible to enforce because the onus is on us to prove what went missing. And that's extremely difficult. So it's trying to get that right calibration of the requirements on that. So we want to encourage compliance. We have not had a great track record of issuing tree permits in an ongoing and fair way. So what we want to do through this, we want to promote best practices. We want to balance the needs of development with the objectives of better environmental management. We want to protect for sufficient tree cover, not only for aesthetics, but in a lot of cases and in a lot of areas in Sechelt is around slope stability, as well as the privacy and the shade. And finding ways to protect the trees, particularly pre-application. So that would be something we'd look at from an enforcement point of view or a fine point of view, that we want to encourage them to, people to comply with the bylaw and not clear cut before an application. So those are some of the questions that we'd be looking at through the engagement process. With this bylaw, we would definitely refer to our development community, the community associations, and again on the Have Your Say Day. Thank you.
Questions, Mayor Seegers?
Thank you. I know that we've had a lot of feedback from the community about developers coming in, clearing out big lots and not keeping the trees, which we like about the community. In this new form here, am I correct in reading that it would apply to a single family lot as well? So somebody who's wanting to do some development on their own property or want to take down a tree on their property would actually need to get an arborist or somebody to come and do a plan for them before they could actually take down a tree. Do we have any idea what the cost of getting that kind of stuff done would be to a homeowner? Like, I don't know, I've never done this. Yeah, that might be a piece that would come into play in this. And then I don't know how many arborists we have on the coast to do this. Looks like we're creating a new industry. Yeah. Yeah, I know we have one on staff. And then under 6.6, we're talking about coordination of geotechnical recommendation by a qualified professional engineer. I know one of the things that one of our communities brought forward was hydrological. When somebody came in and was clearing out a whole bunch of trees that actually had an impact on water flow on the site. Would that be covered under there as well? Or is that something else that would be?
Through the chair, not as directly. That might be something we would need to add. It's different expertise. They're certainly related, but it is a different assessment.
So we could add something in there about hydrological assessment or something. Should it be, the site be sufficient size or something that it would be required? I mean, one tree may not make a difference, but when you're clearing a big lot, particularly on a slope, it can have a huge impact on the flow of water.
Any other questions from council? Councillor McLean.
So to follow up on the mayor's comments about the cost of an arborist, do we have any idea of what the cost for permits will be? Has that been established yet?
Through the chair, no, it hasn't. I had something in there and thought that would actually be something we'll actually deal with through the process. Because again, it's trying to find that right balance. We want to encourage it, and it might need to be a different tier of kind of having a base, and then if you're doing multi-acre development, it'd be something else. So we're going to look at that and present some options at the same time. What we really want to do is have kind of incentivize the application and have penalties if it's not followed, as opposed to having a really high application and discouraging people.
Mayor Seegers, totally different topic.
So I was in Vancouver recently and driving down the road, and they were talking about the fact that Vancouver was selling trees to the community. One of the things they want to do is increase their tree canopy in the city. They found so many trees have been taken down. So they bought a whole bunch of different trees and were selling them for $10 a piece. These were like $60 and $70 trees. And people, a certain number of them could be pre-purchased. So, they put an order in for a particular tree. They sold 1,500 trees, and they're going to be doing more. So they want to green up Vancouver. So just totally different topic. Anyway, 7.8 on here. It says where the planting and replacement trees would hinder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They'd have to be planted within 90 days. How do you see a follow-up process going where we would, whose responsibility would it be to follow up and make sure they actually did plant their trees? Is that part of building? Is it part of bylaw? Where does that follow?
Through the chair, usually we work with parks on that. It's not really too different from looking at the landscaping and the landscape bonds, where we do follow up as to whether they followed what was in the plan or the development permit, to see if they've abided by it.
That's all you got? Any other questions, Councillor McLean?
I'm going to go into comments. This is pretty restrictive on the individual. I have two cases. One where I built a fence this weekend on one of my family's properties, and under the damage section, I'd say I caused damage to trees. So this, I think, you hit a root, you take out a branch within normal property maintenance, but according to this bylaw, you would need permits to do that. So I think that's a bit restrictive. And then the other case is my family has been harvesting trees from a 2-acre property for the last 80 years to provide firewood. They responsibly replanted, but they've never replanted a tree. What's the requirement? 2 for 1, and I think 4.5 inches in diameter. They've never done that, because that's going to cost quite a bit of money. They've planted saplings, and through the 80 years that they've owned the property, they're now fully grown trees. So I want to maintain that ability to chop down one tree at a time to manage your property. So right now I am against some of the changes proposed in this. I'm going to vote in favor today so we can bring it out to the community. And I'm going to ask the community to convince me that this is a good thing. So it's not really for staff. It's I want to see the benefits of protecting every single tree and not allowing people to maintain their properties. Because frankly, if I'm understanding this right, in order to cut down a tree, you need a permit, which needs an arborist, you need a permit fee, and you need to replace it with some sizable trees. That's a whole lot of work for one tree. And money, yeah. So where's the balance? I'll be looking to the community for that. So probably not support it in the final adoption, but I'll support it today.
So you're moving recommendation number 2?
Sure.
Second by Mayor Segers. All in favor? Just trying to move things along, folks. So we've come to the end of our committee of the whole meeting. And so I would like a motion to adjourn. And second, all in favor? Questions from the public?